Welcome to FM Coins, the place where every coin tells a story of history, rarity, and incredible value. Today, we're going to explore the world of the United Kingdom's most valuable one, penny coins. The small copper pieces that once passed through millions of hands, but today stand as treasures worth thousands, and sometimes even more. Many of these pennies are linked with fascinating stories, from rare mintages and special varieties to coins that were never meant to be released at all. Collectors all over the world are willing to pay huge sums of money at auctions to own these rare pieces of history. So stay with us until the end of this video, because the penny you might think of as ordinary could turn out to be worth a fortune. Now we will talk about the first and most legendary coin on our list, the 1933 one penny. This coin is often described as the holy grail of British pennies. Its fame stretches beyond collectors, as even people with little interest in coins have heard stories about its extraordinary rarity and value. The 1930s were a difficult decade for Britain. The Great Depression had left its mark on the economy, and the demand for coinage was low. Millions of pennies from earlier years were still in circulation, meaning there was no need for the Royal Mint to strike new pennies in 1933 for everyday use. Yet tradition played an unexpected role in creating one of the most valuable coins in British history for centuries. It was customary to place complete sets of coins beneath the foundation stones of important public buildings as a symbol of prosperity and continuity. In 1933, the Royal Mint prepared a few sets of contemporary coins for this very purpose. Among them were the pennies dated 1933. It is believed that only about 7 examples were ever struck. Some were placed under foundation stones, one was preserved in the Royal Mint Museum, and a few ended up in private collections. Because of this, the 1933 penny became an instant rarity. Collectors who aimed to assemble complete date runs of pennies soon discovered that 1933 was nearly impossible to obtain. Over time, its reputation grew, and newspapers and magazines began to call it the rarest British coin. Auction houses fueled this legend, when the few privately owned specimens were sold for astonishing sums. In 2016, one sold for $72,000, and others have fetched even higher prices depending on condition and provenance. The 1933 penny story is not just about rarity, but also about symbolism. It represents tradition in a time of economic hardship. It shows how decisions made for ceremonial reasons, not circulation, can accidentally create a coin of immense value. It has also been compared to the famous rarities of the United States, such as the 1804 silver dollar or the 1913 Liberty Head nickel. All three coins were born out of unusual circumstances and went on to become world-famous treasures. Today, the 1933 penny remains a dream for collectors. Very few will ever see one in person, but its legend keeps alive the excitement of coin collecting. It stands as proof that even the smallest denomination can become priceless under the right circumstances. Now we will talk about another fascinating rarity, the 1952 one penny. While it may not have the public fame of the 1933 penny, among numismatists it is regarded as equally extraordinary. This coin comes from the reign of King George VI, who led Britain through the dark years of the Second World War and into the early years of recovery. By the early 1950s, millions of pennies from earlier years were still circulating, and there was no urgent need to produce new ones. For this reason, no regular 1952 pennies were struck for everyday circulation. However, a few were created for record keeping, for the Royal Mint's collection, and possibly for inclusion in special proof sets. This makes the 1952 penny one of the rarest dates in the entire penny series. What gives the 1952 penny additional historical significance is the fact that it was the final year of King George VI's reign. He passed away in February 1952, and his daughter Queen Elizabeth II ascended to the throne shortly afterward. Therefore, the 1952 penny represents the last chapter of George VI's coinage and the closing of an era. Only a handful of 1952 pennies are believed to exist, and most are housed in institutions rather than in private collections. When they do appear at auction, they command very high prices. One example is reported to have sold for over $14,000, and others have fetched even more depending on condition. The rarity is not in question, but what makes it especially appealing is the emotional link to history. It is not just a coin, it is a marker of transition, a reminder of the end of one reign and the beginning of another. This rarity and historical connection make the 1952 penny one of the most desirable penny coins for serious collectors, even though most will never have the chance to own one. Now we will talk about one of the most Intriguing and historically significant coins on this list. The 1937 Edward VIII pattern penny. This coin is not only rare, but also wrapped in the drama of royal history. Its story begins with the short and controversial reign of King Edward VIII, who ascended the throne in January 1936. After the death of his father, King George V, Edward VIII was a modern and unconventional king, known for his charm and his relationship with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. His desire to marry her sparked a constitutional crisis because at the time, the Church of England did not allow the monarch to marry a divorced person with a living ex-spouse. Faced with opposition from the government and church, Edward chose to abdicate the throne in December 1936, making way for his younger brother, who became King George VI. Because Edward VIII's reign was so short, no circulating coins bearing his portrait were ever issued in the United Kingdom. However, the Royal Mint had already prepared designs and struck a limited number of pattern coins in 1936 and 1937 in anticipation of his coronation. Among these patterns were the 1 penny coins, which today stand as some of the most valuable and historically fascinating pieces in British numismatics. The Edward VIII penny patterns are incredibly rare. Only a handful exist, and they were never released for public use. Most were retained by the Royal Mint, but a few found their way into private collections. When they appear at auction, they attract enormous attention, not only because of their rarity, but also because of their connection to one of the most dramatic episodes in modern royal history. In terms of value, the Edward VIII pattern penny has achieved staggering results. Some examples have sold for well over $100,000, depending on condition and provenance. Collectors are drawn not just to the coin's rarity, but to the story behind it. The abdication of Edward VIII was a pivotal moment in British history, changing the course of the monarchy and shaping the era that followed under George VI and later Queen Elizabeth II. Owning a 1937 Edward VIII penny pattern is like owning a piece of royal drama frozen in metal. It is a coin that represents not only a rare numismatic treasure, but also a tale of love, duty, and sacrifice. Its value lies in the powerful combination of rarity, beauty, and historical significance, making it one of the most desirable 1 penny coins ever struck in the United Kingdom. Now we will talk about a coin that at first glance might seem extremely common, but under certain conditions, becomes one of the most valuable pennies of the United Kingdom, the 1967 1 penny. Millions of these coins were produced during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, and for decades they were among the most ordinary coins in circulation. In fact, the 1967 penny was so abundant that it often shows up in bulk. Lots or in boxes of old coins at markets, usually worth only a few pence each. So why does it appear on our list of the most valuable pennies? The answer lies in its proofs, special strikes, and minting errors. The Royal Mint struck a large number of 1967 pennies as circulation coins, but they also produce special proof versions. Proof coins are created with a high-quality striking process, often polished dies and carefully selected blanks, to ensure a sharp and mirror-like finish. These proof coins were never intended for circulation, but were given as presentation pieces or included in official proof sets. A standard proof example of the 1967 penny already carries more value than a circulation strike, but it is the rare varieties and errors that elevate it to legendary status. Among the most desirable are the misstrikes and error coins from 1967. Errors can occur in many ways: double strikes, off-center strikes, wrong planchets, or even variations in the lettering and details. Collectors hunt for these unusual pieces because they combine rarity with the familiar design of a common coin. In recent years, some rare error examples of the 1967 penny have sold for hundreds and even thousands of pounds at auction, depending on the severity and uniqueness of the error. One of the most famous stories connected with the 1967 penny is its role in the end of an era. It was the last year in which the penny was produced in massive quantities before Britain moved toward decimalization, which was introduced in 1971. The old penny became obsolete, but the 1967 issue remained one of the most widely remembered. That link with the transition period also adds a layer of collectability, especially for those who value coins, not just for their metal content or rarity, but for their place in history. The lesson of the 1967 penny is fascinating. It shows that even a coin that appears incredibly common can contain hidden treasures. While most people see it as just another bronze disc, specialists know that proof strikes and rare minting errors can make it one of the most valuable coins in the entire series. This is why collectors never dismiss any coin. without carefully checking its details, because sometimes the most ordinary coin hides the greatest surprises. Now we will talk about another fascinating rarity, the 1902 low-tide 1 penny. This coin belongs to the reign of King Edward VII, who ruled from 1901 to 1910. His coinage marked the beginning of a new century and introduced subtle but important design changes that make some of his pennies highly collectible today. Among them, the 1902 low-tide penny stands out as one of the most famous varieties. To understand why it is called the low-tide penny, we need to look closely at the reverse design of the coin. The reverse features the seated figure of Britannia holding a trident and shield, a design that had been in use on pennies since the reign of Charles II in the 17th century. Beneath Britannia, the sea is shown with a line representing the water level. On the 1902 low-tide variety, this line appears lower than usual, creating the visual impression of a low tide. It may seem like a small detail, but such varieties are the heartbeat of numismatics, and they often determine whether a coin is considered ordinary or exceptional. The reason behind the low-tide variety is linked to the use of different dyes. When new dyes were prepared for striking pennies in 1902, subtle variations occurred, resulting in the lower sea level on some coins. These variations were not intentional, but collectors quickly spotted the difference because the low-tide version was struck in far fewer numbers. Compared to the normal issue, it has become a prized rarity. Auction results demonstrate its desirability. A 1902 low-tide penny in top condition can fetch several £1,000s, with some examples selling for more than $5,000 depending on grade. Even worn examples are worth far more than face value because of the scarcity of the variety. For collectors of Edward VII coinage, the low-tide penny is an essential piece, not just for completing a set, but also for owning one of the most iconic varieties in the British penny series. What makes the 1902 low-tide penny particularly appealing is that it represents how small details can change everything in numismatics. To the untrained eye, it looks like any other Edwardian penny, but to the careful observer, that tiny difference in the sea line transforms it into a rarity worth thousands. It reminds collectors to always examine their coins closely, because hidden varieties often hold great value. The 1902 low-tide penny remains a symbol of Edwardian coinage, a piece that connects artistry, history, and collector passion. Its rarity ensures that it will always hold a place among the most valuable pennies of the United Kingdom. Now we will talk about two of the most interesting and valuable varieties in the British penny series, the 1919 and 1926 pennies. These coins may not sound as legendary as the 1933 or 1952 pennies, but their varieties and minting details have made them highly desirable among serious collectors. They prove that sometimes it is not just the year of issue that matters, but also the subtle differences in how coins were struck. Let us begin with the 1919 penny. This coin was issued under the reign of King George V, a period when Britain was still recovering from the First World War. Most 1919 pennies are quite common because they were struck in large numbers for circulation. However, there is a rare variety known as the 1919 KN penny, which carries tiny letters KN beneath the date. These letters indicate that the coin was minted at the King's Norton Metal Company in Birmingham, rather than the Royal Mint in London. Only a small number of these pennies were struck with the KN mark, making them extremely scarce. Collectors value them highly, and at auction, well-preserved examples can sell for several £1,000s. Now we will talk about two of the most interesting and valuable varieties in the British penny series, the 1919 and 1926 pennies. These coins may not sound as legendary as the 1933 or 1952 pennies, but their varieties and minting details have made them highly desirable among serious collectors. They prove that sometimes it is not just the year of issue that matters, but also the subtle differences in how coins were struck. Let us begin with the 1919 penny. This coin was issued under the reign of King George III, a period when Britain was still recovering from the First World War. Most 1919 pennies are quite common because they were struck in large numbers for circulation. However, there is a rare variety known as the 1919 KN penny, which carries tiny letters KN beneath the date. These letters indicate that the coin was minted at the King's Norton Metal Company in Birmingham, rather than the Royal Mint in London. Only a small number of these pennies were struck with the KN mark, making them extremely scarce. Collectors value them highly, and at auction, well-preserved examples can sell for several £1,000s. Another important rarity from this period is the 1919 H penny, which was struck at the Heaton Mint in Birmingham. While not quite as rare as the KN variety, the H pennies are still more desirable than the regular issues and can fetch impressive prices depending on their condition. Together, the 1919 KN and H pennies are classic examples of how mint marks can make an ordinary coin special. Now let us move to the 1926 penny, which holds another fascinating story. Most 1926 pennies are relatively common, but in that year, the Royal Mint made a subtle change to the portrait of King George V. Early 1926 pennies were struck with the older effigy of the king, which had been used since 1911. Later in the same year, the design was modified to show a sharper and more defined portrait. The result is two distinct varieties of the 1926 penny, the early type with the older effigy, and the later type with the modified effigy. The modified effigy version is far rarer, especially in high grades. Collectors who specialize in the series often pay a premium to obtain one, and auction results have shown these coins selling for thousands of pounds. The difference between the two effigies may appear small, but to numismatists, it marks a significant change and creates an exciting challenge when completing a collection. Both the 1919 and 1926 rare varieties highlight the importance of careful observation in coin collecting. To most people, these pennies would seem identical to the millions of ordinary examples in circulation, but to collectors, the tiny mint marks and subtle design changes make them treasures. They remind us that rarity is often hidden in the details, and that a coin which seems ordinary might actually be worth a small fortune if examined closely. Now we will talk about one of the earliest and rarest pennies on our list, the 1869 one penny. This coin belongs to the long reign of Queen Victoria, a monarch whose image defined much of 19th century British coinage. Victoria's pennies were struck in vast numbers throughout her reign, but the 1869 issue stands apart because of its exceptionally low mintage and extreme scarcity today. In 1869, Britain was in the middle of industrial expansion and global influence. Yet surprisingly, the Royal Mint produced very few pennies that year. Exact mintage figures are not entirely clear, but estimates suggest only a few thousand were ever struck, making it one of the lowest production runs in the entire Victorian penny series. The reasons behind this low mintage are still debated among historians, but one explanation is that there were already sufficient pennies in circulation from previous years, and so demand was minimal. What makes the 1869 penny even more interesting is that it circulated heavily when it was issued, meaning that most surviving examples today are in worn condition. Finding one in high grade is almost impossible, which is why collectors are willing to pay extraordinary sums for them. In fact, examples of the 1869 penny in fine or very fine condition can already command thousands of pounds, while those in better condition are considered near priceless. Auction records show that when a high-grade 1869 penny surfaces, bidding can be fierce. Collectors who specialize in Victorian coinage see it as a cornerstone rarity, a piece without which no complete collection feels truly finished. Its age, scarcity, and connection to the Victorian era all add to its appeal. The 1869 penny teaches us another important lesson about numismatics. Sometimes rarity comes not from accidents, errors, or special varieties, but simply from low production combined with the passage of time. More than 150 years after it was struck, very few examples remain, and those that do are cherished as gems of British coinage history. It is a coin that connects us directly to the 19th century and remains one of the most valuable pennies of the United Kingdom. We have now reached the end of our journey through the 7 most valuable United Kingdom pennies, from the legendary 1933 penny to the historic 1952 issue, from the dramatic story of Edward VIII to the hidden varieties of 1919 and 1926, and all the way back to the Victorian rarity of 1869. Each of these coins shows us that a penny is never just a penny. It can be a piece of history, a marker of change, a work of art, and sometimes even a treasure worth thousands or more. Thank you for watching this video on FM Coins. If you enjoyed learning about these incredible rarities, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story from the world of coins. Who knows? The next valuable penny might already be in your collection.